SEP Fanfic Readings presents Finding Hermione by ebookdragon. Chapter 47. Blessings. Draco and Hermione stepped through the fireplace and into the cozy headmistress's office. McGonagall was waiting for them behind her desk, surveying scrolls of parchment while she waited for them to arrive. "I hear things went well today," McGonagall said in greeting. "For the most part," Hermione answered. McGonagall looked over her squared, framed spectacles at them and questioned. "Naming Lavender as the manager of my domestic abuse shelter wasn't received well," Hermione answered the unspoken question. "I don't imagine that it was," McGonagall said primly. "It will not be easy for her for quite a while. Unfortunately, we have long memories for such scandals such as that." "Thank you for allowing us to come to talk to the children this evening," Draco said, trying to guide the conversation back to their reason for being there. He didn't want Hermione getting into another argument in defense of Lavender. "I hope that this drama will soon come to a close so that we aren't constantly upending the children's day with parental visits. This is a boarding school, after all, and we do have days where you can visit your children now," McGonagall said in irritation. "Well, if Hogwarts and the rest of this blasted world weren't so behind the times, we wouldn't need to keep coming here so that we can have a conversation with our children," Hermione snapped at the headmistress. Hermione took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Minerva. It's just very difficult not to be able to talk to them when so much is going on." McGonagall huffed and pursed her lips in annoyance at the two of them. "Minerva and Scorpius are currently in the common room. I assumed that would be a better meeting place than my office." "Thank you, headmistress," Draco said politely. "And what is the password to get into the Slytherin common rooms?" "Honor!" Draco and Hermione left McGonagall's office and made their way down to the dungeons. They received curious glances and whispers from the students. They crossed paths with Neville just before they were going to make the turn down to the stairs to the dungeons. He was huffing his way up the direction they had just come from. "Hey, guys," Neville greeted them. "Hi, Neville," Hermione responded warmly. She hugged him quickly. "It's lucky you're here. I wanted to have a word with you. I've got a meeting with McGonagall right now. Are you going to be around for long?" Neville asked, glancing at the watch on his wrist. "We came to talk to the kids about what happened today," Hermione explained. "You can find us in the dungeons when you're done." "Okay, thanks," Neville said and took off running up the stairs. Draco had to give him credit. Neville moved up those stairs much faster than Draco had in his prime. He didn't want to think about the fact that they had to climb back up those again to get out. They continued their trek down to the dungeons. The temperature in the stone corridors turned noticeably chilly the further down they went. Finally, they came to a blank stone wall with a statue of Salazar Slytherin standing guard to one side. "Honor," Draco said. A door appeared in the stone wall, and Draco and Hermione stepped through. No one noticed them for a moment, and Draco got a chance to look at his old common room unobserved. The common room was crowded with young adults. Some were working on their homework at the tables. Others were lounging on the black leather chairs and sofas reading or talking. Some of the students were wrapped up in green and gray patterned throw blankets. Groups were also gathered on the benches that lined the aquarium walls and watched the creatures of the lake swim by. "Is this what it looked like when you lived here?" Hermione whispered. "It's a lot homier than it used to be," Draco answered. They were finally noticed by the young adults in the room. Someone ducked to a door on the side, presumably Hestia Caro's office and living quarters. One of the prefects stepped away from their group of friends to greet them. "Hello, Miss Granger and Mr. Malfoy," a red-haired young man with a shiny prefect's badge greeted them. "I'm Rory McDougal." "It's lovely to meet you, Rory," Hermione said to the young man. Draco looked around the common room to see if he could spot the telltale signs of two luminously blonde heads. He thought he spotted them sitting at one of the tables in the study area of the room. He was just about to guide Hermione over to them when Hestia Caro burst into the room. She looked to be dressed for bed already. She had her brown hair up in a messy bun. She was wearing an oversized Slytherin tee and a pair of green yoga pants. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of concern when she caught sight of them. Draco looked at her in confusion. "We needed to have a talk with Minerva and Scorpius. I thought the headmistress would have warned you since she sent us down here." Hestia slumped in relief. "She must have forgotten. I thought something bad had happened." She smiled at them and then gestured over to the study. "I'm sure you spotted them already. Can't hide those two anywhere," she joked. "Thank you, Professor Caro," Hermione said. "Professor Longbottom mentioned that he wanted to speak to us after he met with the headmistress McGonagall." Hestia turned to Rory. "Rory, please direct Professor Longbottom to Miss Granger and Mr. Malfoy when he arrives." Rory nodded and went back to the couches with his friends. Draco led Hermione over to the study area and the table where all 6 of the children were seated. Their arrival had attracted the kids' attention already, and their books were already packed away in anticipation of Draco and Hermione's arrival. Minerva and Scorpius looked apprehensive at their unannounced visit. "Mum? Dad? Is something wrong?" Scorpius asked. "Of course not, dear," Hermione answered. She went around the table and hugged both children to her, dropping a kiss on the top of both of their heads. Minerva whined in protest. Scorpius remained silent, but Draco noted that his ears turned pink. James started laughing at Minerva and Scorpius' embarrassed expressions. Hermione went over to the end of the table and planted a wet, smacking kiss on his cheek, leaving a smear of red lipstick behind. Draco noticed Drake hiding his laughter behind his hand for fear of receiving the same treatment. "Do you need us to leave?" Florence asked uncertainly. Her fingers twitched over a book that was still laying out in front of her, closed for the sake of politeness, but ready to be opened again at the first opportunity. Hermione, recognizing a fellow bookworm, smiled at Florence. "No, that won't be necessary. I think we can take a seat over there and talk," Hermione answered, gesturing over to a vacant group of chairs near the aquarium wall. "You just want to see the fish," Draco teased. "It is rather interesting," Hermione responded. "I wish I'd known about this when I went to school here." Draco noticed that she conveniently didn't mention she wouldn't have been welcome in his room to watch the fish swim by. Times were so different now than when they were children at the school. It made him feel old, like a lifetime had passed since they were here. Draco led Hermione over to the 2 black leather sofas nearest the glass wall. Plush blankets with green and silver patterns were thrown over the backs of the sofas. It was one of the many new additions to the common room. A welcome addition as the dungeons get cold during the winter, and the leather and aquarium wall didn't help matters much. The children settled down on the sofa across from them. They looked at them expectantly. Hermione cleared her throat. "So I'm sure you're both curious as to why we're here. It's nothing bad for once." Draco couldn't help but chuckle at the "for once" comment. "The bill passed today," Hermione continued. Scorpius nodded. He looked over at Draco and quirked an eyebrow in silent inquiry. Draco quirked an eyebrow back at him. What did his son expect? For him to get down on bended knee before the ink was even dried on the divorce decree? Probably. Scorpius wasn't the most patient of children. Draco had no idea where he had gotten that from. "You're divorced now," Minerva said. "It's finally over." Minerva's voice sounded both hopeful and relieved. Draco didn't know exactly how to feel about Minerva's reaction. Sad that she was relieved that her mother finally got a divorce. Overjoyed because there weren't any tears or tantrums. But that made him sad for her as well. Sad that after everything she'd gone through, she didn't mourn the loss of Ronald Weasley from their lives. How horrible was it that a child was relieved at the absence of a parent? "Yes, dear, it's finally over," Hermione answered. "Is that all you came to tell us? You could have written that," Minerva asked. Hermione looked momentarily flustered by her daughter's dismissive tone. "Yes, well, I didn't want to just send that in a letter." Hermione's voice took on a teasing tone. "Dear Minerva and Scorpius, I'm divorced from Ronald Weasley. Please keep up with your studies. Love, Mum." Draco chuckled to himself. Scorpius leaned back on the sofa and crossed his arms over his chest. He looked expectant and hopeful, as if he expected another big announcement to follow the unimpressive news of Hermione's divorce. Minerva smiled faintly. "Mom, it's not like it was a surprise to us that you were trying to get a divorce." Hermione took a deep breath. "There's also probably going to be some unflattering things said about Draco and I in the paper over the next few days," Hermione said hesitantly, "as well as some things about Lavender and Ron." "Why?" Scorpius asked. "I hired Lavender to be a co-manager of the domestic violence shelter that Draco and I started. It wasn't received well when I announced it at the press conference," Hermione explained to both children. "It's so odd how you two get along now," Minerva commented, looking skeptically at her mother. Hermione sighed heavily again. Draco thought she was probably getting tired of people questioning why she would forgive Lavender for sleeping with her husband. "I know it seems odd to you and everyone else, but sometimes you have to forgive to move on and heal," Hermione explained. "So you forgave her so that you can move on with your life?" Minerva asked. "There's more to it than that, but essentially yes." Minerva nodded in understanding. "All right, then." The door to the common room opened, and they turned automatically to see who was entering. Neville stood on the landing looking around the room until he spotted them and walked over. He looked a little out of breath and slightly frustrated. "I'm glad I caught you before you left," Neville wheezed. He plunked down in the armchair next to Hermione and looked around at the room. "I never get used to this common room." "You needn't have rushed, Neville," Hermione said. "Is everything okay?" Neville asked, looking startled by the question. "Oh, yes, everything's fine." He waved his hand in a frustrated but dismissive gesture. "I just wish my Gryffindors behaved as well as the Slytherins." "Oh? Why is that?" Hermione prodded. Neville looked around. Minerva and Scorpius were listening avidly, no doubt eager to hear the latest gossip from a teacher. They would have to learn to feign bored disinterest if they ever hoped to get information they weren't supposed to have. "I can't really tell you," Neville hedged. "I don't feel right violating the students' privacy by spreading gossip." "Oh," Hermione said, disappointed. Then in a more businesslike tone, she asked, "What was it you wanted to talk to us about?" Neville looked uncomfortable. He squirmed in his seat, causing the leather to emit a loud farting sound that seemed to echo off the glass wall. Minerva and Scorpius both giggled quietly behind their hands. Hermione smiled. Draco decided to spare Neville and pretend the whole thing didn't happen and kept his face impassive. "I was hoping I could talk to you alone, Hermione," Neville said uncomfortably. His face tinged red with embarrassment. Hermione looked reluctant to leave, but with a murmured, "Be right back," she stood obligingly and followed Neville to the door of the common room. As the door swung closed behind them, Scorpius sat forward and looked accusingly at Draco. "You haven't proposed yet!" he exclaimed indignantly. His loud exclamation caused the area around them to go silent. Draco pulled his wand from his sleeve and flicked it, saying, "Muffliato." Draco noticed a few shoulders hunch in disappointment at being denied gossip. "Try for a little discretion, son," Draco chided. "And no, I have not proposed yet. It seems a bit gauche to propose marriage before the ink is dry on the divorce decree." Scorpius looked chastened to be scolded by his father. Draco softened his chastisement by saying, "There are also proprieties that must be observed." "Such as?" Minerva prodded, looking amused. Draco leaned forward and rested his elbows on his thighs. He looked seriously at Minerva. Draco's mouth felt suddenly dry as nervousness overcame him. "It is customary for the man to ask his intended bride's father or brother, if the father is deceased, for permission to ask for their intended's hand," Draco answered. It took all his fortitude not to stammer the rest out. "Since that's not really an option, I thought I would ask you, Minerva." "Me?" Minerva asked incredulously. Draco smiled at the astonished look on her face. "Yes, you." Draco took both her hands in his. He felt a faint tremor and didn't know if it was her shaking or him. "Will you give me your blessing to ask your mother to be my wife?" Minerva withdrew her hands from his grasp. Her lip trembled and a single tear slid down her cheek. She nodded her head twice slowly, looking down at her trembling hands clasped in her lap before she looked up and met his gaze. "I give you—" She started hoarsely, and then cleared her throat and started again with more assurance. "I give you my blessing on behalf of myself and my sister." Draco cleared his own throat. He was struggling not to become overwhelmed with emotion. He could only imagine how interesting everyone would find that. "Hey!" Scorpius interjected. "What about me? Are you going to ask for my blessing?" Draco broke out into loud laughter. He reached over and ruffled his son's hair. "I think we know your feelings on the matter," Draco joked. When Scorpius looked like he was going to interject more, Draco held up his hand. "You got to pick out the ring, so don't act like you're being left out." "He got to pick out the ring?" Minerva complained. Scorpius and Minerva started squabbling good-naturedly about their roles so far in their parents' upcoming nuptials, as well as future roles to come. Draco tuned them out and stared unseeing at the aquarium wall. He wanted to ask her to marry him soon. He didn't want to wait until Valentine's Day, which was almost a month away. Besides, that was too trite. He wanted them to be at least engaged when word of their pregnancy broke out. He didn't want people to be counting back on their fingers and thinking his children might be the weasels, though many probably would try anyway. Hermione returned from her meeting with Neville. Draco raised his wand and quickly canceled the Muffliato charm. That would surely raise questions from Hermione on why he felt the need to cast the spell. Minerva and Scorpius flawlessly changed their argument into a potions argument. Hermione sat down on the leather sofa beside Draco. "What did I miss?" she asked, looking at the three of them in turn. "Nothing," Scorpius and Minerva sing-songed in unison. "Smooth," Draco teased. He turned to face Hermione. She looked suspiciously at him. Draco hoped to distract her by asking, "What did Neville want?" Hermione narrowed her eyes at Draco, but answered the question anyway. "He wanted to let me know that we'll need a new care of magical creatures, Professor, soon." "Please tell me you're not going to appoint Hagrid," Draco groaned. "No," Hermione laughed. I love Hagrid dearly, but he is not cut out to be a teacher. Besides, I'm not officially the head of magical education anymore, so I don't have a say over who gets appointed."
"Thank God," Draco sighed dramatically. "Not thank God that you're not the head of magical education anymore," Draco amended hastily as he caught sight of Hermione's arched eyebrow. He added, "You're on the Wizengamot now. You could assign yourself to magical education if you wanted." Hermione sat there mulling over his words. "Mum," Scorpius interjected, pulling Hermione out of her thoughts.
"Yes, dear,"
Hermione responded, casting a curious glance at Scorpius and Minerva.
"We're glad to see you and all," Scorpius started uncomfortably. "But we have a test tomorrow in herbology," Minerva finished. Draco frowned a little to himself to find that he was being dismissed by his children in favor of studying. He looked over to the table of the kids that had vacated and found James, Drake, Florence, and Hermione still over there with their heads down studying. "Of course, you should go back to studying," Hermione said. She stood, and they all followed her example by standing as well. Hermione looked around the room one last time. "It is so odd being in here," she mused. Hestia came out with such impeccable timing that Draco wondered if she'd use charms to monitor the goings-on in the common room. Considering the shenanigans he got up to in this room, he felt a little relieved at the idea. "Oh, I'm glad I caught you before you left," Hestia said in a rush as she walked over to where they were standing. "I thought I would save you the trek back up the stairs and offered the use of my flue." "That's so thoughtful of you," Hermione gushed. Hestia guided them over to her quarters and gestured for Minerva and Scorpius to follow along. When they passed through into Hestia's office, Draco saw that there were indeed monitoring charms set up in the common room. Framed paintings stood in 2 rows of 3 paintings on either side of the door. In each painting, a portion of the common room was shown. "Monitoring charms," Hermione commented. Hestia puffed up in pride as she turned to survey the paintings. "Yes, I got the idea from watching a Muggle TV show called Las Vegas the summer before I became the Slytherin head of house." "No wonder your Slytherins are so well behaved," Hermione said. "Well, they still get into mischief from time to time, but that's to be expected," Hestia said, smiling indulgently at the screens and at Scorpius and Minerva, who were watching the paintings with rapt attention. Hestia turned to Hermione and Draco and said, "I'll give you a few moments to say goodbye, but please knock on my door after. I would like to have a few words with you both." Draco nodded his assent and watched as Hestia retreated through another door in the room. The head's office was much more cheery than when his godfather resided here. A warm light glowed from overhead. Blankets and throw pillows adorned the leather seating area. Bottles of potions and various ingredients lined a wall beside the desk. On the other wall was a set of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves completely stuffed with books. Draco turned back to find Hermione with an arm around each child, murmuring goodbyes and endearments, and probably a few admonishments in as well. "Come on, let's get them back to their friends," Draco said. He hugged Scorpius, resisting the urge to ruffle his hair again. Minerva came to him next and gave him a fierce hug. He saw Scorpius sneak one more hug from Hermione before leaving the room. Minerva released him and said a quick, "Love you," to both of them before following Scorpius from the room. Draco went over and rapped on the door of the Hestia's private quarters. He walked back over to where Hermione was standing near the fireplace to give the professor some privacy as she came out of her personal space. He and Hermione looked expectantly at Hestia as she crossed over to where they were standing after she closed the door to her room. "It's nothing bad," Hestia started. "I just thought I might offer you the use of my flue if you needed to visit the children in the future." "That is a very kind offer, and we appreciate it," Hermione said. "We are hoping that all the drama is finally at an end, and the children can enjoy a more normal school year." "Nonetheless, the offer is always here if you need it," Hestia reaffirmed. "Would you tell the headmistress that we've left?" Hermione asked. "I don't want to keep her waiting for us." "Absolutely," Hestia nodded. Draco guided Hermione over to the fireplace. "We'll get out of your hair now. We really appreciate everything you're doing for the children." Hestia waved the comment away in an "it's-nothing" gesture. They left Hogwarts and went back home to rest before what Draco had no doubt would be another busy day.